Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. And Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well, but
Good.
I hope I feel just as good at the end of the program because we're going to be talking about wasteful spending. Can you believe there's wasteful spending in our government?
Never.
Yes, that is the subject for today, is wasteful spending, in particular the military budget, because that's been so much out of control, and it looks like it's going to get worse than ever, and it contributes significantly to the budget, the deficit really, and in the big picture, many have said, and I tend to believe, that empires end with an overextension of troops overseas and an overextension of military spending. So that is what I'd like to touch on. I am sure you will support my position that we could afford to cut some of that spending.
And of course, reminding the audience, we use the words military spending because the press likes to call it defense spending, but this has very little to do with defense. And we should probably just kick it off with a quote because I think this captures everything. This is a quote from President Trump earlier this week, when he unveiled the 2019 budget request. One of the other things I think so important to mention is that in the budget we took care of the military like it's never been taken care of before. In fact, General Mattis called me. He goes, "Wow, I can't believe I got everything we wanted." I said, "That's right, but we want no excuses. I want you to buy twice, okay? Twice what you thought you had for half the price." So maybe we're going to get involved a little bit in the buying. We want to get twice as many planes for half the price. And believe me, we can do a lot because the procurement process is very outdated, to put it nicely.
That's putting it out front. He's not mincing words. He's telling us what his plans are. But it does bring up the subject of Keynesianism, military Keynesianism. Of course, Keynesianism term is thrown around. There's no precise definition, but what we use it for is excessive spending, excuse for spending, good for jobs. Government spends and they produce the jobs, never considering, instead of what, the principle of where would the money have gone. But when this was first announced and he was being interviewed and he was talking about it, he concluded his sentence with his bragging about the budget. He says, jobs, 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 and never asking, well, what jobs did you take away this money from? What kind of free enterprise would be if you weren't spending trillions of dollars overseas? That never enters their mind, and it's always jobs at home. And what's he talking about? Military weapons jobs, building factories. I mean, it is so loaded. The total budget next year is $4.4 trillion, the biggest ever. The deficit is expected to be $1 trillion. Could be worse, depending on the economy, and it depends on interest rates. Interest rates might be much worse. Spending even may go up, as bad as it is. If there's an emergency, what if we're attacked, or what if somebody hits us? We'll have to spend more and more. So they're unpredictable. That is a lot of money, but the military budget now. Some people estimate it's as high as $1 trillion when you do everything, State Department, everything. But if you just take the direct military, it's about over $700 billion. And this is astounding. John Whitehead, a friend of ours, writes frequently on this subject. He made an interesting point. He says the United States has 5% of the population, and we spend 50% of the world's effort to have militarism, and he even estimates that we're in even much greater than all the other countries together, like bigger than 19 countries. Wow. And some of the countries are very little, but anyway, we spend a huge amount, and it's always because we're under attack. We have to protect our national security. When was the last time, that we really had to worry about even Russia invading us? In the Cold War, when the Cold War was settling down, they talked about why we had to spend because of the Soviets at that time, which is more justifiable from now. I said, where do you think the attack is coming? Because they were offering an appropriation for tanks. I said, where are we going to have this tank battle? Up in Alaska someplace? Is that the way where they're going to land? But no, it's too big. It's deeply flawed policy, but it's big time money and big time waste. You'd think they'd see a little bit embarrassed about the F-35, plane that not doing so well, and they're going to build more and more. They're up to 77 now, and they're authorized to do 90. So the insanity never quits.
And 50% of those are sitting there on the tarmac because they don't work.
Yeah.
But I think this whole big military budget for 2019, it proceeds under three false assumptions. The first being that, as you pointed out, no one's going to attack us. We're not going to have tank battles in Alaska. But it presumes that we control the whole world. So any threat to our 1,000 military bases overseas is equivalent of an invasion of the U.S. The second fallacy, the second false assumption, is that our military is depleted. And this is something that Trump even said when he unveiled it. This is going to fix our depleted military. Well, if you look at military spending, even under the sequester, there's no depletion there. And the third one is that this new budget reflects the new national strategy, national security strategy of the U.S. But that new national security strategy, as we remember, we talked about it earlier on the show, that reflects a whole new turnaround that terrorism is no longer the main thing. Now we're back to Russia and China. So we've invented a bigger enemy now that the other enemy is kind of going down. ISIS is no more that much. So we got to come back and get a bigger enemy. So those are the three false assumptions that feed this.
Yeah, and those are the big things in the big picture. And sometimes when you talk about 10 billion, 20 billion, 100 billion, and a trillion, it just sort of goes over people. It's hard to comprehend. But there are sometimes when you can find an item that wakes them up. And I think it was Whitehead that made this point that we spend $20 billion a year on air conditioning to make sure the barracks are air conditioned in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's incomprehensible, but it's insane when you think about it. In wars that we're going to lose, and we haven't won one thing, and we've been involved, for 17 years, and they never question it. And we elect a president that doesn't fib to us. He does as he wants more. And he's looking for the enemies. If it's not North Korea, it's Iran, it's Russia, it's China. We always have to have the enemies there, and we need this weaponry. But I think his quote that you used, points out, it's all about jobs and special interests and profits. Most Americans know this. Most people around the world know it. And so many of these weapons, whether they're airplanes or ships, they're asking for a lot more ships too. I think of that as being World War II. I mean, don't we live in a modern age where you can shoot a missile? And even being in the Persian Gulf, they say that we have to be prepared. But if a hot war breaks out there, I think there's a lot of missile technology that can take out these ships, whether they're destroyers or aircraft carriers or whatever. And this is all ancient warfare, but it's warfare against the American taxpayer. That's what I gripe about, and it will play a major role in our bankruptcy.
Absolutely, and the ships is the classic example of the procurement process. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Trump asked for 9 ships. Congress said, no, we're going to give you 13. They said, okay, we'll build 10. This is sort of the bargaining that goes, and it's always ratcheted up. The same with the F-35s, as you pointed out. Also, almost 16,000 new troops, a pay raise, but that's the smallest part, you can believe that, and another $10 billion for missile defense. So there's a little bit, or there's a lot, for everyone in this budget, except for us.
And I think in the debate over the budget, somebody asked the question, can you point out to something that the Congress cut back on? Nothing. But they increased a lot. Even what the Pentagon asked for, even what the president asked for. And the Congress comes along. And last time I looked, I thought the conservatives were in charge, of the process, and that they were going to cut some spending. But no, even if you speak out, and a family member of mine, got really, really hammered and ridiculed for suggesting that, didn't we promise this? Aren't we supposed to do this? Shouldn't we spend less? And believe me, that was not a gentle criticism. They were furious that somebody would suggest that they should cut back. But it isn't the fact that they know it; it's the embarrassment. That is what just drives them nuts. If they say one thing, they do the opposite, and somebody points a finger at them and says, I thought you said this. They don't like that at all. That, to me, is what really riles them up, and because I think it brings out their guilt, is what I think it does.
Yeah, that's a good point. And here's the other idea, is the false patriotism. The idea, if you don't spend more on the military, You somehow want America to be overtaken, somehow want America to fail. But the real patriotism is understanding that spending $1 trillion on an empire will cause us to fail. You know, if you don't want America to fail, you should be concerned about this spending.
You know, another incident or item that I think makes a point that might wake up a few people, and that has to do with Guantanamo.
Yeah.
You would think we could wake people up just by, arguing the issue. Why should we have secret prisons? Why should we have the authority to arrest anybody we want, any place in the world, and call them an enemy combatant and give them no rights whatsoever and haul them off and put them away forever without any due process? That's a pretty big item. And that's why, I think most presidents in recent times have said we'll close Guantanamo down. But Trump has been a little more blunt. He thinks it's a good place to have. And what are they going to do? Refurbish it? $69 million.
Yeah.
And there's 15 people that they hold there. What does that come out to be? $4.6 million per prisoner. And the whole thing is, it has a bad name. It shouldn't be there. It enhances a secrecy. It's known for torture, and it's just so un-American. This is not what we should be all about. It's secret prisons and deciding that we need more money. Taking this money, I'm trying to make the point about a little bit here, a little bit there. People can understand that. $69 million. That could go a long way. Even if it were for a program that we might not support.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be better, in any of this military stuff, wouldn't it be better to spend it at home? I used to try to sort of make a joke of it a bit. I say it's much better to waste your money at home than it is overseas, because for the most part, government is waste. But it would be better. There was a time when I think, it was going to be $1 billion to build the embassy in Baghdad,
Yeah.
and I'm sure it's still running hot and heavy, biggest in the world. I was saying, well, what if we take that $1 billion, cut it in half, take half off your deficit, and spend half of it on helping the people that we have taught to be so dependent on government programs. That would be a way you could have a transition, but nobody will have any part of that. They won't cut for patriotic reasons. You cannot cut military. And how much money do we need to have a parade? We have to parade and show how important this is. And that's a real problem, because we don't make much headway in trying to cut some of the military. And this is important. Of course, the whole budget should be cut. My position is you have to change the belief of what the role of government ought to be before you can even touch this, because no politician I know, except for the few, can vote against anything that they get painted as, they're uncaring, unpatriotic, and therefore you have to do it, and the spending rolls on.
Yeah. And I think it is helpful to break it down. Even people say 69 million, that's just a drop in the bucket. But that gives us a way to sort of digest the spending. And here's another item in the budget, in the 2019 military budget, that people should stop and say, hold on a minute, what is going on? This is a total of over $500 million for two things in Syria: train and equip the rebels, and for border security. So $300 million to train and equip Syrian rebels. It's like we're back in the Obama, it's like Hillary had won, right? And then another 250 to build the wall or whatever they're going to do over there to make sure they have border security. So this is $500 million still in Syria.
Right. And I've taken the position, I don't like fences and all this stuff, and our border policy is not very good. But there is a legitimate reason to have border guards. It's a position given to the Congress, responsibility to the Congress. And you could say some of that money could be used to enhance, border guards. At least check on people coming in, rather than waiting until they get here and they're here 10 years, and it's so complicated to say, okay, we're going to round you up after you've been here 20 years and put you out. But I just don't happen to believe that people should come anytime they want, go on the welfare system, become citizens, and start voting. There has to be a better way, and we're not even close to it. My approach there has always been to don't subsidize it, don't give them any freebies, be pretty generous on visitations, but don't let them come with that. But anyway, that's part of the security business. We worry about borders overseas. We don't do well here, and we complicate our internal problems. And then, of course, a bigger picture of the problem is that when these wars that we engage in and precipitate so often causes a lot of mass migration, which is part of the goals of cultural Marxism, is disruption.
Yeah.
And we know there's a lot of that as a consequence of our foreign policy.
You know, did you know that the U.S. military owns 430,000 properties around the world? And someone suggested, you know, can we sell a couple of these, close a couple of these, and maybe make a few $1 billion and cut the button? No, we can't get rid of any of these.
Yes. Well, it looks like my assessment is the American people are losing. Who's winning? The deep state, which includes definitely the military-industrial complex, and those who have ulterior motives for our foreign policy. So if you'd like to, you could go ahead and summarize our little program here today.
Well, I'll just throw out one final stat. Ernst & Young took a look at the Defense Logistic Agency's money, trying to do a little mini audit. That's just one part of the Defense Department. They found that the Defense Logistics Agency has completely lost track of $800 million.
They lost even more than that.
So if Americans don't think they're getting ripped off, they're somehow they've taken their eyes off the ball.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of Americans are awake and they realize the frustration. Their voices aren't heard, but ideas are heard. That's the big difference. You don't have to wait until you think you have 50% of the people saying one thing. But you have to have the right ideas are spread. Then the 51% will join, and when the attitudes of the people, the perceptions and the beliefs of the people will be transmitted to what the government is like. Governments are generally endorsed by the people, even though through a lot of pain and suffering when the government gets out of control. But right now, there's still a lot of people who won't, they wouldn't be spending this on this militarism if the American people were saying, don't do it or we're going to vote against you. That doesn't happen. It happens one time in my lifetime, and that was when the American people said, we've had enough of this Vietnam stuff. But they're not at that point now. But it will come. It will come. It's a big deal for us trying to police the world and spend all the money. And on top of it all, you know, I've spent a lot of hours and years on trying to expose the Federal Reserve on how they play a role in this, how they finance this. You can't have any of this without the financing of the Federal Reserve. And that's why we've advocated the audit, believing that if the American people knew what was really going on and how that money's passed out to their friends, they would say, put their foot down. But we don't audit the Pentagon and all the abuse there. And this is just literally inviting the abuse, you know, and they want to participate. Government wants to participate in big negotiations and the spending of this money. And I think it's all about money and has very little to do with national security, because quite frankly, I believe there's a lot of good people out there, and we work at it, that can make the case and say, it doesn't even help national security. It really long-term hurts the economy. It doesn't help national security, and yet we march along because the people still trust the dollar. But the marching on will eventually erode the confidence in the dollar. Right now, we're seeing the erosion of our status around the world. We are losing that position, and the dollar is going down too. So in time, whether it's this year, next, or 5 years from now, eventually this will all change, because I do not see where they're going to turn the switch off in Washington. Right now, we have a government that was supposed to clean up this mess, and they're part of the mess, because there's no attempt whatsoever to cut spending, and therefore they are Keynesian at its worst, that deficits don't matter, and a lot of conservatives buy into this. So it's all a philosophic fight. It's a philosophic battle. Ideas are important. So I want to do my share, and that's what this program's all about, is to share this information, to motivate people to think about it, at least prepare personally for themselves. That's important. But also, I think the ultimate protection is maximizing the amount of liberty we have, and that means minimizing the power of the state. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please return soon.